In this video, I'm going to outline this idea of order of decreasing inclusiveness when it comes to classifying organisms. So every organism on the planet that we've recognized and described belongs to a domain, a kingdom, a phylum, a class, an order, a family, a genus, and a species. And these are listed in order of decreasing inclusiveness, meaning that the number of different types of organisms is greater in domain than species. So what this means is that if I was to go and collect 1,000 random living things off the planet, most of them would fit into one of the domain categories than one of, for example, the genus categories. And in fact, there's only one type of species on the planet. If I get two different plants, they're going to each belong to a different species. So domain is going to be the most inclusive, whereas species is going to be the least inclusive. So again, if I was to just go and pick a bunch of random living things off the planet, most of them would fit in, or more of them would fit into a domain than a species. So our three domains are going to be bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. An example of an order would be carnivores. So imagine if I get a bunch of living things on the planet, more of them are likely to be eukaryotic organisms than they are likely to be carnivores. So let's use an analogy of a grocery store to really clarify this idea of least and most inclusive. Let's say we go into a grocery store and it's going to be one of those big grocery stores that sells not just food but a bunch of other stuff as well, like household products, and maybe they sell some clothes or whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to start categorizing all of the products sold within this large grocery store into an equivalent of domain, kingdom, phylum, etc., etc. So we can just understand this idea of order of decreasing inclusiveness. So if you were to go into the grocery store and you were to try and divide everything in there into just, for example, two very broad categories, that would be the equivalent of domain. So in the living world, domain are things like bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. In the case of the grocery store, how about edible versus non-edible products? So that's going to be our example of our domain. Is it edible or is it not edible? If I go into the grocery store and pick 100 random things for sale in there, a lot of them are going to fit into an edible category and a lot of them are also going to fit into a non-edible category, and they're either one or the other. All right, on to kingdom. So now let's think about what is the kind of the next level that we can categorize things under. We're going to pick one of the domains and then we're going to try and separate items in that domain into further broad categories. Let's take edible and think about what are two big categories that we could fit all edible products into. How about perishable and non-perishable? And remember, we're talking just about the edible products now. Also within the non-edible domain, there are going to be different kingdoms. For example, there might be automobile things, or there might be clothes, etc., etc. But we're looking under the domain edible, and now we're going to try and identify some kingdoms. So what are some really broad categories? All right, now let's take one of these kingdoms and identify some phylum within those kingdoms. So let's take perishable. What are some really broad categories of perishable items within the grocery store? You could try pausing the video now and coming up with some ideas. All right, so here are some broad categories I've come up with: dairy, fruit and veg, meats, prepared meals, things like sandwiches, sushi, which is amazing. These are some really, really broad categories. Again, they're underneath the kingdom of perishable. So now let's just take a little step back and look at this idea of decreasing inclusiveness. So let's get a bunch of products in the grocery store, let's say like 100 of them. More of them are likely to fit into the edible category, which is domain, than they are to fit under the phylum of dairy, for example. All right, so let's keep going all the way down until we get to our equivalent of species. Let's go under fruit and veg and look for some big classes of fruits and vegetables. Well, or produce. So, I don't know, why don't we do fruits and vegetables? All right, and keep in mind that many of what we actually call the vegetable is actually a fruit. Let's take vegetables and let's find some nice big orders within vegetables. How about our root vegetables and then our leafy vegetables? Now let's take root vegetables, the order root vegetables, and let's find some families of root vegetables. How about starchy versus non-starchy? And let's think of some types of starchy root vegetables that we can get in the grocery store. I was able to come up with yams, turnips, sweet potatoes, and beetroots. Let's take potatoes and now let's come up with some species of potatoes. So this is the least inclusive category. So some types of potato. All right, I'm no potato expert, but here are some types of potatoes. Russet potatoes, Yukon Gold, Idaho, fingerling potatoes. I think I grew some like purple potatoes once. So these are all species of potato, variety of potato. So again, let's take a step back and look at this order of decreasing inclusiveness. The categories up here, domain, is the most inclusive, and as we go down towards species, it's going to be least inclusive. Let's get 100 random items from the grocery store. More of them are likely to be either a fruit or a vegetable than they are to be a potato. More of them are likely to be a non-perishable good than, for example, toilet paper. All right, so as we go down these categories from domain all the way down to species, the number of varieties of organisms that are included in these categories down here is less. This might be something like African lion, when up here the class might be mammals. So there's many different types of mammals, but only one African lion. Under the genus, there's also different types of very similar organisms to lion. So lion is Panthera leo. We've got things like, for example, Panthera pardus, which is the African leopard. We need lots and lots and lots of different categories of species to fit every living thing on the planet in. And we only need very few domains. In fact, there are only 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Species, the analogy might be barcodes. You need a unique barcode for everything in the grocery store, whether it's edible, non-edible, whatever. And then domain is very, very broad.